Hi, I'm Terry and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about and then shooting the single most popular personal carry self-defense handgun of the entire 19th century. The Colt 1849 31 caliber pocket gun. But first, let me just take a moment to say if you have subscribed to my channel, thank you. I'm over 300 now, which is just absolutely great. I appreciate every one of you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, then I certainly invite you to do so. I'm getting a pretty good group of people following, so you'll be in good company. And if you like this video and you'd like to see more of it, afterwards, zip on over to my Patreon page of the same name, Times Gone Tech, and pick out a membership. After all, even pocket guns cost money. While it's called the 1849, Colt actually released the pocket gun along with its big sister, the 1851 Navy, in 1850. And between its release in 1850 and in its final shutdown in 1873, Colt manufactured over 300,000 of these things, which is just, by those days, just an unprecedented number. This thing was the most popular handgun in the world at that time, and there are historic records of people even carrying and using these right up into the 1920s. It was just phenomenally popular. It's really hard to stress just how popular this little gun was. I've said this before in other videos, but it really was the had-to-have personal carry self-defense handgun of the 19th century. The question is, why? Firing a 45 grain bullet at a muzzle velocity of right around 750 feet per second and delivering a whopping 28 foot-pounds of energy on impact, that's less than a modern 22. This thing by today's standards seems just ridiculously underpowered and clearly not suited for self-defense. I mean, it barely even qualifies as a firearm. So, people weren't stupid then. And it isn't like they didn't have any other choices. There were clearly more larger, powerful options available between 1850 and 1873, or even really into the 1920s. So what was so great about the underpowered, woefully inadequate pocket gun? Well, the only way to really find out for sure is to shoot a few people with it and see what happens, which every lawyer I've spoken to has assured me would be legally tricky at best and immensely unpopular. But another way to do it is to shoot a reasonable facsimile of a human torso, which presumably won't complain, and see how much damage it can do. So, you know what that means? Meat target! This is the Paul Harrell meat target. Now, I call it that because the idea was actually invented, as far as I know, by a man named Paul Harrell of Paul Harrell Productions. Runs his own YouTube channel. He also does firearms videos, and he's actually very good, better than I am. So if you haven't been to his channel, you really should go check him out. He does some very good stuff. You might like it. And this was his idea. Now, this is not, I think, intended to be a better way of demonstrating the effectiveness of a firearm than, say, ballistics gel. Ballistics gel is very reliable. It's very accurate. This is just a different demonstration. It's just a little more dramatic, maybe a little more visual. So what we've got here is we start out with pork chops to represent human pectoral muscles. We back that up with a set of pork ribs to represent the front of the rib cage. After that, we've got fruit. Now, you can usually use lemons, oranges. This time I've got grapefruits. They were on sale. What can I say? I don't really like grapefruits that much, but I think I'm going to maybe start after this morning. And we back that up, finish that up with another set of pork ribs for the back of the ribs. And then we back the whole thing up with this high-tech wood post bullet stop. So let's put this back together and see just how much damage that 1849 pocket gun can do. So I'm going to be shooting from a distance of just over arm's length, about maybe that far. Why? Because that's the range that this thing was intended to be used. I know everybody wants to see steel ring or soda bottles explode at 100 feet, but this thing was not intended to shoot steel gongs or soda bottles at 100 feet, nor was it intended to take out a shooter in a mall food court at 40 yards. This thing was intended to stop up close and personal, in your face, bad things from happening like armed robbery, and they're generally going to be from about here closer in, okay, like maybe even like this. So I'm going to set up about 3 feet away. I'm going to put all 5 rounds of this into that meat target and see what we get. Now I'm shooting a round ball, .310 diameter lead ball. In all fairness, most people at the time would have been shooting a conical bullet in a paper cartridge, and conical bullets do generate a little more penetration, some would say a lot more, than round balls. But balls actually generate more shock, more knockdown power. They may not go in as far, but all the testing shows they can do more damage. So, and also, another thing is, remember, this thing was popular all over the world, not just here in the United States. And what if where I lived, I just didn't have access to conical bullets or cartridges? All I could get were just balls and loose powder. So we'll consider this the low-powered version. This is like the least you could expect from this handgun. And we can safely assume that we could bump it up from there a little bit, okay? So this is like establishing the threshold. Does the low-powered version of this meet the minimum threshold of reliability or dependability or capability? So I'm firing a .310 lead ball with a paper patch in front of 13 grains of 4F black powder, which I made myself a few days ago, and CCI number 11 cap. So let's set up, shoot it, and see what happens. Let's see how we did. I don't know if you can see that. My camera shut down. It just shut itself off for some reason. So you missed part of it. But anyway, this is the back ribs, and there's a bullet stuck in it. And then there's another one right here. And then none of them, well, it looks like there's a small hole. Looks like 2 went through. There's another one right there. So 3 got stuck in the back ribs. 2 went through it. And there's the damage done to internal organs from them. And 1 did not make it through the front ribs. So out of the 5 rounds, we did some major damage to, say, the heart, for example. That's fatal. That's a deadly wound right there. 1 really pissed him off. The others did some major damage. So overall, out of the 5 rounds, I'm going to say that person's dead. Okay, so before I go into the conclusion, just let me say that what should have been the easiest, most fun part of this video, shooting the meat target, turned out to be the biggest headache, the biggest pain in the neck, and the most trouble. At one point, my secondary camera, which is doing the close-up slow motion shoot, video of the shoot, just shut itself off. By the time I got that figured out and then got it back running again, this camera just shut itself off, and I lost some video on that. And it was frustrating, but did show some good damage. If you didn't see it in the video, 1 round got stuck in the outer ribs. It hit a bone and stopped. Broke the rib, but it did not go through. The other 4 rounds did go all the way into the second ribs. 2 of them, almost 2 of them, made its way to the back of the back ribs. It didn't make it through the plastic, but it made it all the way through. They were poking out the other side of the ribs. And 2 of them just did some major damage to internal organs like heart, lungs, liver. So with that much internal damage out of 5 hits, I've got to say that person is dead. That's even today, not going to survive it. That's with 5 rounds. With 1 or 2 rounds, who knows? So anyway, to the conclusion. So what is the takeaway from this? Well, I'm not going to even try and compare the 1849 pocket gun with any existing modern handgun. The two technologies are just separated by so many years. I think the comparison really isn't fair. It really is apples and oranges. But if we take the pocket gun on its own merits and its own capabilities, I believe it has demonstrated an ability to stop the vast majority of the kinds of attacks that I as a civilian are likely to encounter. Remember, I'm not so concerned with killing or incapacitating an opponent as quickly as possible. That's a military or law enforcement mindset, and a valid one in view of the situations that they're likely to encounter. But if I could put 2 rounds into some guy and he runs away, I'm perfectly fine with that. All the police have to do then is just watch the local hospitals and pick him up. But at close range, with what effectively amounts to 5 rounds of double-aught buckshot, there is a good chance of inflicting a fatal wound. But there's a little more to it than that. Remember, back in the 1900s, there were no antibiotics, and even surgery as we know it today was still in its infancy. And when you consider a lead ball lubed with lard and beeswax, a paper wad, and then even just the soot from the powder itself getting into the wound at close range, there was a pretty good chance of any wound becoming infected. And then an equally good chance of resulting in amputation of a limb or even death, even if a week later. And that must have had a great psychological impact on any would-be attackers. Just the threat of being shot with one of these was likely enough to cause any bad guy to back off, think twice, and go look for an easier target. And which in turn would then give the person carrying one of these little pocket guns for self-defense a greater sense of security. The vast majority of the 300,000 of these things that were made, like most modern handguns today, were likely never even fired in self-defense. They didn't need to be. This was the deterrent. But because today we have antibiotics and better surgery skills, does that render this completely useless as a self-defense weapon? I don't think so. People today don't really want to get shot any more than they did back in the 1800s. It's just something about human nature. We don't like having holes poked into our vital organs. And even today, no one is going to take 5 hits of this in the body at close range and just laugh it off. Getting shot in reality isn't anything like we see in the movies and on television. Even a single round into the abdomen could result in hitting a major artery or a vein and cause bleeding to death very quickly unless immediate medical attention is received. And even today, that could be sometimes slow in coming. So while the pocket gun is not suited for long distance self-defense or maybe even stopping somebody pumped up on drugs or fanaticism or committing a bank robbery, it could at least potentially stop an attacker bent on committing something like an armed robbery at close distance. So, feel free to draw whatever conclusion you want from this little test. As for myself, well, if I lived today in a jurisdiction that only allowed civilians to carry black powder firearms for personal self-defense, like say maybe France or Poland or maybe even now some jurisdictions in the United States, I wouldn't really have any concerns with carrying this as a personal self-defense gun, especially as a backup to my primary weapon. As always, thanks for watching, and remember, like, subscribe, Patreon, and see you next time.